When doing the behavioral portion of this experiment, be sure that you have 8 fish tanks. Rinse the fish tanks with hot water, but do not use soap or Windex because the chemicals will harm the fish. Place a sheet of white paper on the back of each tank and use white dividers in between all the tanks in order to create a controlled environment. Make sure to begin the experiment at the same time each day and play the same music or white noise for the duration of the experiment. Be sure to note any interruptions that could have affected the experiment. Place laptops in front of the tanks and make sure to turn off passwords in order to make it easier to turn off the camera. Start the camera right before placing the fish in the tank after completing the following steps. Be sure you put signs outside the lab in order to tell people that there is an experiment going on and that they need to be quiet. Once you start the experiment, leave the room for as much time as possible in order to eliminate distractions. 4 adult zebrafish were divided into separate tanks labeled A through D, with fish D as the control fish. Tanks were filled with system water. Each tank was set up with 2 columns that were 200 milliliter beakers. Fill the columns with water from the housing system. Take clamps and attach them to the paper towel holders and then place the beakers upside down in the clamp so that the beakers are filled with water and that the rim of the beaker is touching the surface of the water in the tank. These beakers are called columns in the case of this experiment. About 4 large pieces of dried brine shrimp or bloodworms were inserted into both columns of each tank using tweezers. Be sure to wipe the tweezers off with E2OH before using them. On days -4, -3, -2, and -1, each fish was then placed in their respective tanks for 25 minutes. After 25 minutes, the fish were removed from their tanks and placed into the E2OH training tanks for 30 minutes. For the alcohol training, there was an additional setup of 4 more tanks. All tanks were filled with water from the fish housing system and were 0.5% E2OH. 15 milliliters of alcohol was used in each tank. Be sure that there's no alcohol in tank D because it is a controlled tank. The alcohol training is followed by a 15-minute detox period, and then the fish are returned to the housing system. At this point, the white noise can be turned off. On day 0, use the same setup, except there are no alcohol tanks. The tanks are set up the same way as for just food training. However, no food is inserted into any of the columns, and 0.5% alcohol was inserted into the left columns of tanks A through C. In order to insert the ethanol into the column, pipette 1,000 microliters of E2OH into the left column. Be sure that the E2OH does not go into the tank but goes into the column. You should be able to see it floating up a little bit. Fish D is the control fish, so there's no alcohol there. Fish were placed in their respective tanks for 25 minutes, followed by a 15-minute detox period. Then the fish were placed back in the housing system. Each tank was recorded and videos have to be watched. Watch the day 0 video all the way through and record each time that the fish enters a column and for how long. For the day -1 and -2 videos, watch the first and 10th minutes that the fish are in the tank. For all videos, record time spent in columns and note any unusual behaviors, like if they aren't moving at all or if there's erratic swimming. Then create charts based on % of time spent in the E2OH columns and also the amount of time spent in the columns after total time spent in the columns.